AI has been in the news a lot lately, and there's some interesting implications when it comes to the future of AI and how it's going to impact HR. First, let's get a little bit of background in place and then move forward from there. The person that you're seeing right here, that's Sam Altman. He is one of the co-founders of OpenAI, and they made a lot of news over the last year or so with their advancements in generative AI. A recent soap opera has been him unexpectedly being removed from the board of OpenAI, and then almost a week later getting reinstalled. Altman is a pretty interesting use case as far as tech founders go. His push into AI is pretty interesting because he's been on record referring to the implications of AI as potentially replacing some quote unquote median humans in the workplace. So that's an interesting piece of context to keep in mind when you're thinking about how can AI be applied in the future and what does it mean for the average worker in the workspace. When Altman was brought back on the board, one of the first things that he did is that he removed a few members of the board, notably two of the only women that were on the board. And one of the new board members was Brett Taylor. And if you're not familiar with Brett, he was formerly with Facebook and also with Twitter at the peak of the era where there was a lot of disinformation happening on those platforms. There were massive censorship movements on those platforms and some pretty dubious things that were going on both of those platforms, both Facebook and Twitter. And he was one of the leaders of those organizations. So when you think about board composition, you have two women being replaced. And one of the replacements is a garden variety, what appears to be tech bro, some questionable backstory and history. So it's just something to keep in mind. The other new board member is Larry Summers. To say that he's had a questionable history is kind of an understatement. So Larry has got deep connections across all over Washington. When you think back to some of the issues related to the housing crisis, he was one of the key players in actually letting financial institutions off the hook. He's also been on record in previous policy positions, openly asking the question, why shouldn't the global north, so modernized Western countries, leverage underdeveloped nations as their manufacturing hubs to basically do their heaviest polluting manufacturing segments in those countries versus Western countries. So that gives you some insight to his worldview. And again, this is somebody that has those worldviews and is on the board of a major tech company. And that should give everyone some pause into where the future of AI is going to be. There's a lot of other questionable things that Summers has said. You can look those up. I mean, particularly during his time at Harvard, it's interesting to kind of track all these things down. What's interesting about all of this is that there's already a volume of evidence that indicates that there's bias baked in all different levels and layers of AI. And when you have that bias baked in and you take a look at the board members who were removed, particularly the two women board members, those two women board members were the ones that were actually advocating for pushing the brakes on the headlong race towards general intelligence, which is one of the major goals that AI companies are striving towards. Those two women board members were removed, and now you have two new board members who have a track record for questionable decision making, questionable practices, and certainly there isn't a representative voice on that board, which should give some pause to a lot of practitioners, a lot of leaders who are thinking about how to integrate AI into the workplace. And now you have this seemingly unrelated issue popping up with Sports Illustrated, which was caught publishing a number of AI-generated articles under fake profiles. So they had actually generated two avatars that were AI-generated and then used AI-generated articles and posted that out without informing the readership. All of these seemingly disparate things have implications when it comes to how HR is supposed to move forward with AI. So when we look at the future of work and we look at how HR practitioners and HR leaders and leaders in general are supposed to integrate AI into work, all of these things that I just mentioned have downstream implications for those organizations and how this should be implemented. Because if you think about it, AI from a pure efficiency perspective will take a lot of task level activities off of the plates of any number of job functions. But then you have the added implication of, well, what if Sports Illustrated can easily create avatars and drive content out, what's to keep organizations from using virtual avatars that are AI driven as part of their support staff across their organization? So there's some interesting implications both from an ethical perspective and a practical perspective that need to be considered. Tying all this together, what this means for HR practitioners and HR leaders is that you have some massive uncertainty that you need to make sense of. And you also have to factor in some of the background gaps or flaws that exist within these platforms that haven't taken into account even the most basic levels of diversity from a gender perspective. But certainly, as you can see, as one of the leaders in the AI space, OpenAI has no representation on their board. And it's part of the standard tech bro culture that we've all kind of seen the impact of. So it's going to be a pretty interesting future when it comes to how HR organizations are going to incorporate AI into their organizations and do it in a way that is ethically sound and people-centric. So over the next couple of years, it'll be interesting to see how HR leaders and leaders in general are embedding AI into their organizations. One of the major trends that we've seen in our interviews of HR leaders is the move towards incorporating generative AI into organizations so that you can actually get more efficient from a task basis. Now, that's low-level stuff. I'd be curious to see what the future holds when it comes to higher level, higher value tasks that incorporate AI and what the implication is for the average employee. So I'll be curious to hear from folks in the comments as well as going forward on how AI is being introduced and integrated into their workplaces.